meeting back to order, and I believe there may potentially be a reportable item, so I'm going to defer to Commissioner Crawley.
Thank you, Tom. We do have a reportable item from our special meeting, and I would at this time like our bankruptcy attorney, Emily Tully,
Your bankruptcy counsel is taking a moment in the restroom.
Okay. So, should we wait, or can we go on with the, we can wait for a few minutes?
It's your pleasure how you would like the reporting out to be handled.
Then we'll wait just for a few minutes. We had an hour, a little more than an hour-long meeting, so she's entitled.
Where's the sunlight?
I know, it's really
The
good.
air conditioning.
Are they
like
heating,
plastic.
they heat, yeah.
Oh, we have this break. Now, I would like to pull some items. Three and five.
And I would like to pull 1 and 7. Thank you.
And pull 9 as well.
Thank you, Tom.
Commissioner Brennan printed out, so.
Amended number.
What is this?
March 15th. They're getting pulled, and then we can announce that we're.
Thank you.
You don't need it anymore?
Amending
Got a whole
and
bunch right
Okay.
distributing new.
Oh, that's all right. Okay,
All
so,
right, we're back in session.
so we do have a reportable item from our special meeting, as will be stated by our bankruptcy counsel from Henson and Bridget, Emily and Charlie.
There will be an auction sale on June 1st. The following day, Friday, June 2nd, debtors will report the results of that auction sale. Given the importance of the district's permit and the surf event, the district has scheduled a special meeting for June 5th at 6:30 at the Harbor District's El Granada office. The bankruptcy court will then make its determination as a sale hearing on June the 7th.
And just to be clear, that's actually for the second item on on the special meeting agenda, which is entitled Conference with Legal Counsel, Existing Litigation Pursuant to Government Code 54956.9D1, NRA Cartel Management, Inc., case number 217BK11179DS. Thank you, Ms. Charlie.
Would you like to adjourn the meeting?
Yes, is there a motion to adjourn the special meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So the special meeting is now adjourned.
And I'd like to welcome everyone to the San Mateo County Harbor District Board of Harbor Commissioners meeting for May 17th, 2017. May we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Brennan?
Here.
Commissioner Brennan? Here. Commissioner Corrales?
Present?
Commissioner Lorenz?
Here.
Commissioner Mathush?
Here. I believe we have some staff introductions.
Oh, yay.
Thank you, President Mathush, Commissioners. I'm very pleased to introduce to you Anita Final. After an exhaustive and very competitive recruitment, Anita rose to the top as our new Director of Administrative Services. Anita comes to us from the city of San Diego, and for her husband anyway, is returning to her roots, her husband actually having graduated from Hampton Bay High School. Anita's background is in administration, management, and finance, and everybody that we spoke to, certainly during the reference checks, spoke very, very highly of Anita. So I want to welcome Anita, and I want to also take this moment to formally thank Glenn as well, as we've done in the past. We keep trying to get rid of him, but he won't go away. But I will also say that Glenn will be here for the June meeting, as Anita did have a pre-scheduled vacation for part of June. She won't be here for the June meeting. Glenn will be here for the, no, you'll be back for the June meeting.
She'll be here at the meeting.
Oh.
Yeah, June 20, yeah, you will be. You'll be back, but Glenn will be here also, because that'll be the budget hearing. Anyway, I don't know if, Anita, if you'd like to say just a word or two to the commission?
I'm very pleased to be here, and my husband grew up in El Granada, so it is coming back home for us, and I'm very happy that I got selected for this position, and I hope to serve you well.
Welcome
Welcome.
aboard.
Oh, welcome.
I've got another staff introduction to do also. Lauren or Lo Hodges is with us today. Lo rounds out our reorganized team. If you recall, for those of you who were on the board at that time, there was, we reorganized and we created 2 new positions a while back. We filled the planner analyst position, Rebecca McCoy. Lo joins us as our admin analyst. She comes to us from the San Francisco Conservatory of Flowers, where she worked very closely with San Francisco City and Parks Department, so is well-versed in working with government entities and elected bodies. She has a broad range of experience in project management, special events, marketing and public relations, and when I was talking to her before this meeting, she said, well, pretty much say whatever you can think of, and I'll probably have done it at some point or another. So with that, I'd like to welcome Lo Hodges.
Welcome.
I guess just a quick note to say hi to everyone. I am on my 3rd day for the Harbor District, so I'm starting to learn the ropes. And I live in El Granada, and I'm an avid user of Pillar Point Harbor, and I'm just kind of standing here beaming with excitement, and I'm so incredibly stoked to be on board.
Excellent, welcome.
All right, we've also got our newest hire at Pillar Point Harbor, Connor Cakebread. Connor's a local to the coast there, and he actually has been in this building before. He said that came in for an award for playing baseball as a younger man.
Yep. Yeah, I've been at Pillar Point for 2 months, and I love coming to work every day, and I thank you guys for the opportunity.
Great, thank
Glad to
you.
have you.
Welcome.
Welcome.
I'm very pleased to be able to say that with Connor's introduction, with Lo starting on Monday and with Anita starting a week ago Monday, we currently, and I think for the first time since I started here over 18 months ago, have no vacancies.
Outstanding.
And so I'd like to welcome our new team. Thank you very much for being here.
All right, public comment. So the public may address the Board of Harbor Commissioners for items not on the agenda. At this point, I don't have any public comment cards. So we're at number 2 on the agenda, commissioner comments. Any commissioners choose to make a comment at this time?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment.
Commissioner Brennan.
Thank you. So I've noticed that for several meetings since we changed our policy to have 1 meeting a month versus 2 meetings a month, that we have not been completing our agendas. And that's reflected in the meeting minutes. But what concerns me is that the items that are not being heard due to ending the meeting before we complete the agenda are not rolling over to the next meeting, and instead they are disappearing as if they never occurred. And it's my understanding that every other public agency that I'm aware of, if they don't complete their agenda, then items automatically roll over to the next meeting agenda. And for whatever reason, that hasn't been happening, so I just wanted to make sure that the board was aware of that. That's all I have.
All right, and lately, I've witnessed a board that's not working together or respecting the duty of the board with respect to the public. Members of the public have suggested a time limit for each commissioner, for instance, like 3 minutes. Everyone gets their board packets 3 to 5 days in advance, and they're available online on Friday. That should give us adequate time to formulate our thoughts and decisions on a process. I'm asking each commissioner to be respectful of our agenda. There's no reason why we can't get through an agenda in the allotted 3 hours. Please, let's all seek a higher level and discharge our responsibilities for which we were elected.
Thank you.
With no other comments? We're on to the consent calendar, and I would ask if anyone would like some items pulled from the consent agenda or a motion to accept, but I've already had items 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9 pulled. Sounds rather odd to me. But let's see. Is there a motion to approve 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10?
So moved. Second?
Roll call?
President Mateusz?
Yes.
Commissioner Blanes?
Aye.
Aye.
Commissioner Chantarelli?
Aye.
Commissioner Brennan?
Your turn.
already
You mean
called the
Commissioner
meeting.
Bernardo?
Yes.
Dan Bernard?
Moving on to item D, our discussion item. 5-year capital improvement plan with public meeting input. Mr. Moran, staff report, please.
This is a motion to adopt the proposed 5-year capital improvement project plan in accordance with the 2015 LAFCO recommendation to establish a 5-year CIP to better document and plan for funding and implementation, as well as to facilitate the prioritization of capital improvement projects. District staff have identified the proposed deferred maintenance and improvement projects for the board to consider funding over the next 5 years. These projects have been laid out in a logical manner and prioritized over the next 5 years in the CIP plan. If approved, the proposed 5-year CIP will provide a roadmap for the future funding of capital projects totaling $26 million at Fort Point Harbor and $10 million at West Point Marina. No project will be performed without the board's further approval of specific design plans and additional public outreach efforts for each project. Staff has determined that at the end of the proposed 5-year CIP, the district will still have $12.1 million in reserves and $5 million in unassigned reserves. It's very important to the district and the board to gather input on the proposed CIPs from tenant stakeholders, local civic organizations, and the public in general. To further this effort, district staff facilitated 2 well-advertised 5-year CIP public input meetings, one on April 5th and the other on April 13th. The general manager, myself, and the director of administrative services, and both assistant harbor masters attended the meeting. At this time, I'd like to go over a summary that we got from the public input. For the dredging at the Princeton shoreline beach nourishment and erosion protection, consensus with the public that attended that the target depth should be maintained by necessary dredge episodes. Unintentional sediment accumulation in front of Half Moon Bay Yacht Club is a concern and should be considered during beneficial reuse of the sand and beach nourishment. Members of the Yacht Club were concerned that if we use sands for beach nourishment, that potentially those sands might move over in front of the Yacht Club, further challenging their activities there. Testing of sediment should occur, and if feasible, clean sand should be used for beach nourishment rather than upland disposal. Costs for the different alternatives should also be considered. As far as the promenade sidewalk and parking lot improvement projects, the sidewalk expansion project in front of the retail restaurant center, the plans for widening the sidewalk in front of the retail restaurant area should include adequate ADA parking, which of course we're already considering and increasing. Creating smaller parking spaces for compact vehicles should not be considered during plans for parking lot improvements. One member of the public was concerned that she had seen very small parking places that were just not adequate for larger vehicles. The 2 trailer parking spaces should be maintained in front of the public hoist when making any parking lot improvements. The fishing pier riprap railing and deck repair projects. The ADA concerns should be addressed when improvements are made to the fishing pier, which we are already doing. Care should be taken to ensure sediment does not gather near the fishing pier when planning for beach nourishment along Princeton Beach. The Harbor Master Office remodel project, there was comments regarding the fact that ADA concerns should be a top priority when remodeling the Harbor Master's office. When we discussed the Johnson Pier work dock support piling project, Johnson Pier floating dock should be maintained when planning for eventual Tiger Grant major end of pier widening improvements. Several of the members of the public wanted just to ensure that we had no intention of taking out the floating dock portion, because many of the fishermen use that for repairing their equipment. And then there's a strong consensus that the restrooms at the launch ramp, Cove Point Harbor, should be replaced, and done so with marine grade materials, which can stand up to the harsh saltwater environment. This is something, of course, we would be ensuring occurs. With regard to the light pole retrofits, at Cove Point Harbor, new lighting should be low intensity amber LED with adequate downward shielding. Suggestions made to replace the lighting in phases so changes could be made if the first phase was found inadequate. Paving repair and maintenance in the upper parking lot. Comments were made that pedestrian and bicycle paths should be considered when planning for upper parking lot improvements. We had already looked at some improvements to the upper parking lot, which did in fact include quite a bit of extra pedestrian walkway, but did not address bicycle paths. So we will be implementing that as the project moves forward. For the West Trail bluff and shore erosion protection, the district should consider abandoning the West Trail as global sea level rise and climate change will continue eroding the shore, trail, and adjacent bluff. It was mentioned that a future earthquake event would further change this dynamic as the trail is located on a fault line. With regard to the exterior building painting projects that were in the CIP, one member of the public said that there should be careful consideration to be given to the color selection for the district building repainting. The main concern there was that a light color over dark would increase the cost of the painting project. The entry and wayfinding signage projects at Cove Point Harbor, better control of all parking lots, potentially installing electronic access gates. However, others voiced concerns about the access gates as it was tried unsuccessfully in the past. Additional parking lot signage to prevent RVs and large vehicles from entering narrow turn areas. Careful consideration should be made on any plans for new harbor entrance and wayfinding signage. Mid-Coast Community Council should be consulted to assist in planning. No electronic signage. All new signage should be low profile, aesthetically pleasing, and interpretive. We had already, of course, considered and planned on having large community input, including the Mid-Coast Community Council, when we do address this project. Dock replacement at Powder Point Harbor. One member of the public said that careful consideration should be made when prioritizing dock replacement. Docks should be replaced in the following order: H, F, D, E, A, B, C. One program, CDP, should be considered for the overall dock replacement plan. Future dock expansion, dock design changes, dredging, and possible new dockage should be considered to optimize existing space. When dock replacement plans are being made, ADA docks should be considered where feasible. At Oyster Point Marina. At the Oyster Point Marina public meeting, the question was asked if the district had any plans to immediately replace the old bait shop, which is in very poor, unserviceable condition. Demolition plans were discussed, and the public was informed that due to the current uncertainty surrounding all dynamics of the impending development project and the yet-to-be-determined future location of the Harbor Master's office, there are currently no plans to replace the bait shop with another building. Dock replacement at Oyster Point Marina. When dock replacement plans are being made, additional ADA docks will be considered where feasible. When planning new dock replacement, installation of emergency call box should be considered. Concern that non-motorized maritime activities are not prioritized, and a concern that the dock improvements may further restrict non-motorized boat use. For the 5-year maintenance dredge permit, there was a consensus that a 5-year maintenance dredge permit should move forward so target depths in the marina can be maintained. The north end of the guest dock and isolated areas on Dock 11 currently have sediment accumulation challenges, potentially due to the top wash from the WETA ferries. The district will negotiate, partner with WETA for costs associated with any proposed future dredge project. Regarding the paving maintenance and replacement projects, when planning for any future pavement and parking lot improvements, ADA concerns and ample ADA parking should be a top priority. An emergency helicopter landing pad should be considered. When the Harbor Master building is eventually going to be replaced and locations determined, challenges with accessing the Harbor Master's office during king tides was brought up. As you can see from this photo or this picture, during high tides, king tides, we do have a substantial problem with the access to the Harbor Master's office at its current location. District staff explained that relocation alternatives are being considered. The district is currently discussing with the city of South San Francisco alternative sites for the Harbor Master's office. With regard to the breakwater elevation increase, the condition of the breakwater was questioned. Damage near Dock 11 and overall height due to the sea level rise was concerned, as it is for the district staff as well. Old wooden pilings on the outside of the breakwater, which were left in place after the breakwater's construction, could pose a threat to navigation as they fall apart. And lastly, at both public meetings, there were numerous positive comments about professional actions and positive attitude and willingness to help of all Oyster Point Marina staff and Oyster Point Harbor staff. As discussed, district staff have already implemented many of the public concerns and will consider the remaining as each capital project moves forward before returning to the board for final consideration and approval of proposed project design. Staff recommends the board approve the proposed 5-year CIP plan.
Is there any discussion at the board level, or is there a motion to approve?
I have
I'll move
comments.
to
So
approve.
do I.
Okay, Commissioner Brennan.
So thank you for that, John. And I enjoyed the Pillar Point Harbor special meeting. Or was it a special meeting?
That wasn't a special meeting, it was just a public meeting.
Public,
Yeah, I would like to give a little feedback on that. I do believe that those meetings should be agendized as special meetings, and I just like to note that for the record. But I did appreciate staff's effort on that, and it seemed like the slide presentation was well received, and there were a lot of interesting comments. I did want to follow up on a couple things that I remember hearing, and then I had a couple questions about OPM. I do recall that it was suggested that the district start to look at a renovation plan for Johnson Pier, and that would help us if we had a concrete plan in mind in potentially getting Tiger Grant funds in the future. So that was something that was mentioned that you didn't include, so I just wanted to remind you about that. And with regard to the landslide on the trail out to Mavericks, it was also suggested by a member of the public that the district may want to look at getting ATVs, which we could use for emergency response at Mavericks Beach, since we can no longer drive trucks on that trail safely with the landslide conditions. And I thought that seemed like a really good workaround and probably a lot cheaper than trying to build a wall. So just wanted to remind you about that. And that seems like something that we ought to be looking at in the near term, because we have had people lose their lives at Mavericks, and it's important that, you know, we help with the emergency response when people are injured out there. There was some discussion too about the camping facilities at Pillar Point Harbor and improving the amenities for our campers. For example, access to running water and restroom facility that's closer to where people camp. And then just wanted to pick up on what you said about a big picture plan for replacing docks and the Coastal Commission's interest in programmatic CDPs. And I hope that our staff is moving forward with a comprehensive plan for dock removal, dock replacement, that could be done in a phased way, because I know that came up, and it would also address our ADA compliance issues. And then for OPM, the only comment I had was just, well, two. I know I've emailed our attorney about this and our general manager, but one thing that's been brought to my attention by the public is it appears that the way that JPA is written, that all CIP projects actually create a situation where the district then has to maintain them at 100% or owes the loss in depreciation to the city. And that's not something that I think we've ever talked about at a public meeting, and I think that we need to get a lot more clarification on what our CIP projects are doing to the district from a economic standpoint, a financial standpoint, and whether or not it makes sense to add additional CIP projects, which then we're going to be on the hook for maintaining at 100% or providing full replacement or a cash payout. So I'd love to get council's input on how to interpret that clause in the JPA.
All right, any other comments?
I had the same exact comment about the JPA, doing the CIP projects and then being on the hook for 100% of their value later down the line. We need to know exactly where we stand before we commit to them, it seems to me, because it's a lot of money.
Could Stephen, you provide us some clarification on the JPA on that issue?
That's not on the agenda.
So I'm not sure it'd be appropriate to have a real discussion about the JPA,
It's not on
given
the
the
agenda.
agenda being the adoption of the CIP plan, but if the commission wants to agendize a discussion about the JPA,
Well, we do
that might
have
be
it
an
later.
appropriate time to have such a discussion.
We have it later in the meeting, so maybe you can speak to it then.
Okay?
We do have a public comment on item D1 from Bud Ratz.
Today's been not a bad day. I could do it, pass those along.
One page. Is this what was emailed to us earlier?
There's,
Was this the thing emailed to us earlier? Was this emailed to us earlier? Is this
yeah,
the-
the last page of that is relevant to
Okay.
this item. There are a number of,
May I interrupt for a second? Is what you just distributed all of the documents that you emailed out earlier?
yeah,
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
There's,
Except
I
the-
was going to distribute that.
That's what I
If you distribute information, it's going to be available to the public. You have some extras? Terrific, all right.
I emailed these out this afternoon. I apologize, I had hoped to have them in a spreadsheet, but we had a power outage at the beach, and I had to resort to the old-fashioned way of doing them. There are 4 items on the agenda tonight which are really intertwined. The final budget approval, the strategic plan, and OPA. Basically, we don't have a capital improvements plan. We have a listing of projects that staff has brought forward, of proposed projects. A plan says that you have given thought, that you've set priorities in review, and we still have the question of doing a strategic plan, which after the strategic plan, that a capital improvement plan would come forth being driven by the strategic plan. So I would propose that you not really approve this as a plan. It's been put out into the public as a plan, and I think the public, when they see we have $26 million worth of improvements as a plan, that this has been reviewed and it's going to be implemented. Secondly, you do not have the funds to implement this plan. And part of a capital improvement plan is that you not only have the projects, but you've identified the funding sources for those projects. And that does not exist. So my just thought is I would get back up and get things in sequence and get the strategic plan done, and then go through and put together a capital improvements which reflect that, other than those necessary for emergency, public safety, and our grant-funded projects. I would continue to proceed with those as needed. Thank you.
So the recommended motion was to adopt the 5-year CIP, and I believe I heard a motion to approve. Was there a second?
Yeah, Robert seconded.
And I'd just like to make a quick comment before we vote.
Commissioner Brennan.
So I would like to disagree with the comments that we just received from the public, and just make clear that I'm going to be voting no on this, not because there aren't a lot of great projects that I support, there are, but the funding aspect is a concern, and without understanding our responsibilities with regard to depreciation and our joint powers agreement, there's just no way that I can support voting for this at this time.
Any comment?
Yeah. I would completely agree, just like I said earlier. But we need to understand how this joint powers agreement will affect us, and I can't vote yes on this.
I have a question.
I'm seeing that people forward of the podium here are having trouble hearing us, so if we can all speak up loud enough so that we can all hear, I think it'd be appreciated by those in the audience. No more comments, let's go for a roll call.
Actually, I have a comment.
Oh, Commissioner Chankrall.
Sorry. So I do have a question. Maybe
Louder.
Steve McGraw, maybe you can help answer this, because I understand the concern about the JPA issue. And I think that I've even asked for kind of like an independent study just from the Harbor District's perspective regarding this. And in the meeting that we had, the joint liaison meeting, and I listened to the tape again, or the video, watched it again yesterday, it seemed like the expectation is that 100% of this would be given back. I mean, I think I even made a comment, it was about $16 million of investments that we would be making, and, you know, we'd be giving it back without any, so if we approve this, and let's say the JPA doesn't go our way, how can we get out of this? I guess it'd be brought back to the commission for us to unapprove some of this, all of it, any of it?
I think, Commissioner Chancarelli, in response to your question, which I'm going to restate a little bit, just to
Yeah,
make
because
the
some
mic
people
can
were
pick it
not,
up.
right.
What are our obligations to an approved 5-year CIP if JPA discussions do not go as we might hope?
Well, or
And-
the dollars and cents don't pencil out. Not
Yes.
so much the discussion, but the discussion's gonna go where it's gonna go.
Right.
It's the
But
money part.
The funding part and the financial aspect of a renegotiation of the JPA. I think it's very important to understand that what John, our Director of Operations, has put together here is a plan. And I think it says in the staff report also that prior to the implementation of any of these projects, they come back to this board for board approval of any of the planning with consultants for that project, and then for board approval after an invitation to bid and the results of that bid document, of that bid process. This is a planning guide subject to change by this commission at any time that this commission chooses.
So how would that work if we're in a JPA with South City?
Well, I think that
And there's an obligation on our part in some way, shape, or form?
I think that is going to be addressed in the rewritten JPA. I think all parties recognize that the current JPA is not a good agreement.
I'm talking about a rewritten JPA.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there are certain things that we would look at in that new agreement. One would be, what are our obligations in capital improvements? What are our obligations in maintenance of capital improvements? And what are respective obligations on termination of the JPA? And those are all points that can be addressed. I'd like to think that through working with the liaison committee, that we can get to a point where that there may be a JPA, or let me rephrase that there may be a new agreement for this board to look at before the year's out.
Okay, so basically what I'm hearing is that we could kind of back out if needed, but based on individual projects, I mean, which are supposed to come to this board for approval, is that correct? Am I hearing that correctly?
Individual projects will all come to
So-
this board prior to the award of any contract for design and engineering, and then again, prior to the award of any contract for construction.
Even if we're in a JPA, so then, let's say that this board doesn't approve dock replacement 12, 13, 14, and 7, for example. I'm just throwing that out because I'm assuming each one of these could technically come back to us, right?
Each one of those would come back to you.
Right, so if the expectation is there by the by South City for our obligation under the rewritten agreement, whatever we want to call it, what is our liability if this board says we're not going to approve these individual items?
I think that's a question that should be addressed in the.
Joint.
Do we have an agenda item?
Well, it's the finance committee
Oh,
recommendation,
that's right,
but
yeah.
but we're
Right.
talking
So
about the
I see how they tie
CIP.
together.
Right.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I'm
They
gonna
tie
focus
together.
on this rather than the finance.
Can I jump in for a second?
Please.
You mentioned the word liability in my
Right,
antennae
your antenna go up.
The district is incurring zero legal liability whether it chooses to adopt or not this CIP. You are
Okay.
not committing to any of these projects such
Okay.
that there is liability to anybody.
They could still sue us. Yeah, I know. I mean, that's one point.
I have a comment when it's my turn. a
I'm
brief
done.
comment.
Thank you.
Commissioner Brennan.
I'd just like to point out that while I do hear what the staff is saying, that this is just a, 5-year plan, I have been told by our GM previously, for example, with the HDOC, which got put on the consent calendar for approval, and this board approved HDOC on consent without any discussion, which was very lacking in proper transparency for the public. By doing that, I asked, well, how could that happen? How could that be put on consent? And our general manager explained to me that that was because it was part of previous CIP plan, budgeting, what have you. And so it really didn't come back to the board for discussion, and it still never has come back to the board for discussion. So that's one of the reasons that I'm very uncomfortable with approving projects in part of the CIP plan or a budget that are going to be slid through by our staff without the proper transparency that we should adhere to as a public agency. And I think these concerns about the JPA should not be swept under the carpet, and we've really got to understand our responsibilities related to depreciation of these facilities that we've already paid out to build many CIP, which are for the public capital improvement projects, which are facilities at Oyster Point Marina. We've spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars over the year, millions of dollars over the years on these projects. But now we learn in understanding the JPA that we have to pay twice for these projects. We have to pay to build them, and then we have to pay the city to bring them up to 100% or cash payout. This is a terrible deal for the Harbor District, and I can't believe that we haven't been discussing this sooner in relation to CIP projects. So I am just very uncomfortable with this, and enough said. Thank you.
Can I make a comment, Tom?
If I may address, I did speak with Commissioner Brennan after the HDOC was on the consent agenda, and I did say that it was part of an approved budget with a consultant with which we have a standing agreement. But I did hear loud and clear that even though this commission has the authority, of course, to pull anything off consent, I did hear loud and clear that a subject like that should be moved to a discussion item, and that's what we'll do going forward.
And I was blocked from pulling that item off consent by the board president. So it was a real unfortunate thing that happened with that item, and I said enough about that. Thank you.
For the record, you were not blocked by the president. You had a motion and a second on the floor, and you had a history of several years of either calling me or emailing me when you wanted something pulled. And we're all up here together trying to work together, and you could have pulled it at the proper time. So just
Commissioners-
for a little clarification.
Tom, it is
So
incorrect
Commissioner Lorena
to
had a
not
comment.
allow commissioners to pull items off the agenda, and I will say that forever because it is true. And you should not block commissioners from pulling things
No one
off
blocked
the agenda.
you, Commissioner
did.
Moranis.
You did block me.
My turn?
Please.
So, Couple things. First, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not completely clear on how this works, so you can correct me if I'm incorrect. But it seems to me that approving a list of CIP projects before we know what the joint powers agreement is going to look like is backwards. Seems to me we should get through that process first and then approve a CIP so that we understand exactly what the commitment will be. Because otherwise we're approving a list, and I realize that we're just making a list, but in the world of the legal system, it can come back to us, it seems to me. And why not just mitigate that by first understanding what we're committed to with the joint powers agreement that we're going to write or get involved with, and then approve the capital investment projects.
My guess, it's a budgeting thing. I don't know, that's a good
Well,
question.
it's also, LAFCO had requested that we have a 5-year CIP. This is simply a plan, and it says we're not committed to any individual project. Commissioner Bernardo?
Thank you. Just, I'm going to keep this very brief. I'm going to support this plan because every agency has to have a framework or a blueprint. We can always augment, change, delete whatever part of the plan that we want moving forward. But this is a framework, and I think we have to have a framework for what you just said and also for other reasons. I'm going to support this.
So I have one last question through the chair. The member of the public brings up a great point with regard to the strategic plan, which I know is on the agenda. So if we move forward, I mean, obviously with the strategic planning process, this would be inserted into that plan at some point. How does this fit in your vision?
So to address your question about how the CIP fits into the strategic planning process, and as this commission has discussed, the strategic plan is a very high-level document. In the meantime, we need to press forward with operating and maintaining our facilities. One of the things that came out of the full-day workshop that we did on strategic planning was the idea that a subsequent action after that development of the strategic plan would be the development of master plans for the facilities. Part of that is going to come out of discussions with South City on OPM. Part of it will come out of discussions specific to Pillar Point Harbor. Those master plans will then get down into the detail, and then we will start constructing, and the CIP will reflect that master plan. But at this point, that strategic plan is up here, and this is lower elevation, operational management, maintenance of our facilities.
Okay, thank you.
We had a motion and a second. If there's no more comments, we'll call for a vote.
Commissioner Brennan?
No.
Commissioner Menendez?
No.
Commissioner Bertusch?
Yes.
Commissioner Champerlain?
Aye.
Commissioner Bernardo?
Yes.
Item 2 is final budget revisions to the adopted 2017-18 preliminary budget. Mr. Lazoff.
Just taking you through the staff report, and also I have some more updates to the table that appears in the packet. And I'll put the most recent updates on, make sure they get loaded up to the website. What we're doing right now is just, we've adopted the preliminary budget, and we have to keep that available to the members of the public so that they can comment at the budget hearing on June 21st. As we go through this, staff reviews those numbers, always trying to make our projections a little better. There is, as I go through this, you'll see that the only real major change is in the amount of capital projects. But before I go into it, in the table, there is an increase showing of property tax of $600,000 over the preliminary budget. That is not correct. We're still projecting the preliminary budget and the final budget will come out with the same estimate of $6,563,300 for the various property taxes, including the redevelopment pass-through. You can see that, and this is just from looking at some of the changes we've made and perfecting the numbers. As reported in that table, what is accurate is the salaries and benefits, a very small increase that we project of $11,000 out of a $4.9 million, almost $5 million salary and benefit budget. Operating, excluding personnel, a $30,000 change, again, pretty small out of a 2.5, a part of our effort to achieve accuracy. And the correct number that should be in the table for net operating profit is actually $41,724 lower than was in the adopted preliminary budget. And again, these numbers will continue to be reviewed, and you'll have a complete list of recommended changes when you adopt the final budget on June 21st. The capital projects number, the actual difference is $963,000 less. And to explain for a moment, your capital plan is 5 years, and you're just looking at the snapshot of what, meeting with the operations director, we believe will be completed during 17-18. And we have, looking at the projects in 16-17 that have been rolled over, looking at the projects we won't get to in 17-18, we've come up with a $963,000 less that we actually think we'll spend on capital projects during the next year. And again, I'll keep meeting with John and we'll keep reviewing this through final. Total expenditures, therefore, the correct number that would appear, should it be in your updated table that I'll load on the website, is $921,276 of a decrease in total projected expenditures, with an increase of that same 921,276 to the difference in reserves between preliminary and what you can expect to see in the final. And the total reserves then in the final budget at this point look like they'll be 1.2 million almost higher than we thought at preliminary. And again, it's not so much what you're spending, but when. We predict more money will be spent, less money in 17-18, more money in the subsequent years on the capital improvement plan as we get closer to the end of this year.
So Glenn, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
If you look at the consolidated budget on page 2-19, I'm assuming that the year-over-year reserves is 0 because that differential is less than 1%, is that right?
I think that the, in this table, what it shows is a $1.2 million increase between, but year to year?
Yeah,
Yeah, you have the 12 million
Yeah,
and the
it's
13, yeah.
12
So there's about a $1.2 million difference.
Well, like a
Roughly
0.99%.
well, actually,
It's less than
1.2, yeah.
1%, right? Is that, I'm just curious.
Yeah,
That's why it's
the
0%.
increases, property taxes keep coming in high, and expenditures, particularly in capital, we're not quite reaching our full goal, so we're adding to reserves.
Yeah, but your year-over-year change is 0%, and is that because?
Oh, if
on
you're
this
comparing
spreadsheet
final to
that
adopted
it's-
preliminary?
Yeah, is that because on this spreadsheet, it's 0.9, it's less than 1%, is that why it's?
In the
0?
adopted preliminary, when that was brought to you, we were still anticipating almost 8.4 million being spent in capital projects.
Well,
And at
that
this
was-
point, we're
that
actually
is-
anticipating, as of today, 7.5 million, which is different from what
Oh.
you see in your chart.
So that, yeah, so, okay, 7.5 mil.
And that number will go up or down depending on
Right.
what John is able to tie up in the next
Okay, thank you.
few weeks.
Um,
Any other question?
Commissioner Lorenz.
I have a question. So, I'm not sure how to frame this, but in a healthy organization, you have an amount of cash that's reserves, and we're using cash for capital improvement projects, for fixing things that need fixing, right?
We are?
And we have income from different sources, and we project out into the future. What I can't do, looking at this budget very easily, is sort out how we're spending our reserves versus
Right.
how our income, if we weren't if we had, let me say it a different way, if we had zero reserves, or we weren't spending any money on capital improvement, in a working system, you'd have some money that was going into the piggy bank, right?
Correct.
That's what we would call our reserves.
Right.
And so what I can't sort out is, in the current way that this budget works, is there money going into the piggy bank? Is there a way you can show us that, and then how you would project that out into the future, so that once we've spent our reserves on capital improvement projects, we're not stuck with no money in the bank if something happens that the district has to deal with?
Can I piggyback on
If
that?
If I understand.
Because it's basically a reserve threshold.
Right,
and a
if I
percentage
understand,
of the budget.
and I think I do, I think what you're asking for, and I think it would be a good thing to add to the budget book, and one of the things I'm hoping is Bud's still here, that he and I were
It's
gonna
the
work
reserve
together on,
threshold.
with staff and try to get more graphs. I think what I have is a graph on 2-52
Right.
that,
Hang on.
that only shows the stability of the reserve, some of the different kinds of, that shows a reserve comparison, but did not go out past 17-18. I think I can easily do one that will go out to the end of the CIP period.
Right, and then maybe have a percentage per year vis-à-vis the budget,
And I think that's also a very
Right.
good idea.
so that we understand where we are in our threshold.
I mean, the budget will
Does that
only
kinda
show
help,
17-18, but I think we can definitely project reserves, with the caveat, as you all know, that the further out the
Change.
projection, I mean,
The
even as the
harder.
months go on, we're learning more about what capital projects are getting done and not done. But there's some pretty good rules of thumb that we can use to conservatively project our
But
reserves.
that's really important, in my view,
Right, I
when you're
agree.
considering spending your cash reserves. You need to know that as you move along in this trajectory, you're not going to end up somewhere where you're in the hole.
Yeah, I don't
In fact,
disagree.
you
I
need
think you
to be
pointed out
positive.
a major defect in the presentation that we need to correct.
And I'd like to also add to that, we have been asking the last 2 or 3 budget hearings, like tonight, to get a graph that shows us, in the past, we always got like a 10-year spread showing us our projected reserves for the next 10 years. And whatever that chart was, all you have to do is look back at our past budgets to see it. We had budget presentations. I have them all posted on my website, sabrinabrennan.com. You can find them all there. And that chart that shows the projected reserves, given all the things that we have to pay for, including, employee costs, retirement, all of those things, was always included previously. And so it's really important that that get back in so that we have some idea. I totally understand that it's just a projection and that it's not gonna be 100% accurate or anywhere close to it, but at least it gives the board some idea. And in the past, those projections have been such that they've warned the board about not overspending, because there could come a day where we don't have the money to pay our employees, and these are important things that we need to be aware of.
Yeah,
So-
if you'll send me one of those from the website, I'd be more than happy to
Okay.
see what we can do. I would say a reserve projection 10-year out, while we could give that to you, that's, I would take that with a grain of salt. So many things can happen.
Agree.
I'd like to comment on that. Okay, so I've worked as a scientist for a long time, and when you do these projections, you're extrapolating beyond your data and all that sort of thing. That's fine, but as long as you know you're extrapolating, and then a year goes by, and then you re-extrapolate, so you're correct. And that's the whole
Absolutely.
purpose of something like this. It's not that we're gonna tie you to the stake, so to speak, if you don't meet the 10-year projection out, right?
Absolutely. I mean,
Because
I understand that, and I
hopefully
think that's how it has to be presented to the public as well.
Yeah.
And that, in fact, just saying, going forward, there's so many variables. A project, we've talked about some of them related to OPM. Maybe none of those projects will get done or be wanted. Maybe the JPA won't continue. That could have a big impact on our reserves. Maybe we've underestimated some of the projects, particularly in the permit environment that we're in. So a lot of things will be changing pretty much all the time.
Yeah.
How hard would it be to do a chart that shows a projection of the district's reserves if we were not continuing to manage and operate and pay for CIP projects at OPM? Can you put something like that together?
Well, I would only want to do that if there's a direction from the whole board to do that. Because that whole thing is so fluid right now. I mean, we're at the beginning stages of even talking to the city of South San Francisco.
Why wouldn't we want to have that information?
Because I think it concludes that we don't want to do something, and I don't know if we want to conclude that, especially given the public funds and enterprise funds part of this budget, which I want to discuss at some point.
Well, maybe a member of
But,
the public can help us do that
well,
offline.
We have a public comment. I want to just talk about a formatting thing, but public comment is, taking that first is fine.
Okay, we have Bud Ratz who'd like to make a comment on this.
First thing, again, I'd like to acknowledge Glenn and the staff for how they've improved the budget process, the accounting. We moved to make the budget more understandable for you people and the public. They've just done a fabulous job. But a budget per se is basically a managerial administrative tool.
Right.
The really important dynamic in the finances of the commission, and especially from a policy viewpoint, is the sources and uses of funds. Where does the money come from? How are you distributing it? How are you allocating it? And so this first chart, I've tried to give a picture which would reveal the dynamics of the financial aspects of the district. And again, this would have been impossible without Glenn's great work in identifying and creating the enterprise, non-enterprise division of activities within the budget. A second thing is that the current budget, you're discussing a $12 million budget and so on. One problem with that is the point that Glenn alluded to, is that whether you budget for capital projects and then you don't spend the money, and at the end of the year, you see at the bottom of the line a great big number and you think, oh God, we're doing great. When, it's very different when you look at operations and capital. So what I've tried to do here in the center of the chart are sources of funds, and identified in blue are the enterprise funds, funds generated by the business activities of the district, and the green are the public, and that's basically $6.5 million of tax revenue. And then you look at the operations at Pillar Point, the expenses associated with the enterprise operated a surplus, and basically you can say that surplus then is going over to support capital activities in the enterprise arena. Both the public and the enterprise arena can be broken down into Pillar Point and OPM. So, basically you're generating $938,000 from enterprise activities to go towards the capital projects. Your surplus, after you basically pay for the non-enterprise activities at Pillar Point and OPM and the central administrative activities, you have a surplus of funds of $2.6 million, and you're going to use 4.8 million of reserves. So it's this dynamic is really where the focus of your discharging your fiduciary and financial responsibility really should be focused.
All right, Commissioner Crawley.
So, Glenn, thanks again. I think it's a huge improvement from when I was appointed to the board in November of 2015. But I wanted to ask you something with regard to the capital expenditures on page 2-26, and it really is more of a formatting issue.
2 dash which, I'm sorry, Commissioner?
2-26, sorry, I may have said 2-226, 2-26. And I think this is, for me, just more of a formatting issue rather than a substantive issue. And I have other formatting issues as well that I wanted to address. How are these particular line items itemized? I mean, because it just seems like Pillar Point and Oyster Point are all kind of, like, it was a mishmash of every line item that you needed to put in. And I'm just wondering if it can be more divided, categorized, where Pillar Point items are itemized, and then Oyster Point items are itemized. I was reading this, trying to get through this.
You can find that on pages 232 through
Right, but this
233,
is-
a breakdown by department.
No, I get that, but this is still a financial document, so I'm just wondering if there's any way to, instead of having to go through all of this, to just, I get that. I have the, anyway, I just, if I'm going through top line, this is what I would look at first, 2-26. So, I don't know how much time it would take. I know that this is itemized like this here, but why wouldn't you do the same thing here on 226 versus the same as 232?
Why is it grouped the way it's grouped?
Why aren't they grouped?
Yeah,
Why
there's
aren't they grouped?
no logical grouping that
I'm-
able to
I'm-
detect.
Oh, you mean that the order of the, we're talking about the
Well, the
capital?
itemized, the item,
2-26, there's no logic to how the projects are listed.
I see.
And I think that we can certainly improve that in the
Right.
final budget document.
so maybe there was a reason for this, so if there's a reason for these being
I
itemized
think-
this way,
I
help me
think
understand it. 'cause
What I think is unfortunate is I believe what it reflects is the order of the GL accounts.
Oh. What is,
If this-
general ledger
in-
accounts, is
In
that?
that case, may I suggest, Glenn, that if this information is presented elsewhere in the document, that we delete this if it's not necessary, but to put them in based on the order of the GL accounts is,
Elsewhere in the document, they're in a different order than they appear in the,
Right.
yeah, you said 232, 233 is the same information, but
they're in
sorted
different order.
and logical.
Right, but if I'm looking at
that's
just
interesting.
this initially,
Well, we'll have to take a look
instead
at
of
that.
going through all the details.
We need to take a
that's
look at
what
that.
I'm-
Your point is well made,
Okay.
Commissioner Giancarlo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Then, and then, the other thing was on page 231, I really like, these pie charts and the percentages, but what would be useful is to maybe put the percentage of the total. So the revenues by department, I think that was just under 11.1 million, and the other expenditures by department is 15.9 million. But it's not, you've got you could probably add everything up, obviously, but it'd just be easy if you were to do this at a glance so that the percentages actually mean something vis-a-vis a total, instead of having the reader add up all the pie pieces. I'm being nitpicky, but I'm just trying to, because I was reading it pretty quickly, and so when I read something like this pretty quickly, it's like, okay, the ease of reading is important.
Well, we now have a bigger staff team working on this, and
Okay.
although I'm,
No, it's good,
although I
Glenn.
still, I'm
These are
afraid
just
I'm.
fine-tuning
No,
things.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate that in a year and 2 years, under Nita's leadership, this is gonna look as much better as it did from what you had 2 years ago. But I do want to say, I think that Steve will be able to get through my head what it is, the change I'm making, because I'm still not getting it. And I've got Lois still here. She's going to be helping us with the budget document itself. And she has very good public presentation skills. And we're going to see I'm very confident we're going to see that final budget that finally wins us the Government Finance Officers Award this year.
Well, I'm not trying to be critical, because
No, I
we're
know.
doing a great job. I'm
No,
just trying to
I
fine-tune.
think we need these comments. I mean, I'm not going to get
Okay.
100% of the tables and graphs that any of us want, but we're going to make substantial progress. And I think Steve knows how to direct the finance staff for what you've been talking about.
While we're on this
So,
page.
can I
what-
just oh, sorry, you want to talk about 231?
This page, yeah. Could you explain, because on the revenues by department, where is the revenue coming from? Is it fees and stuff for administration?
Sure, let me look at that for a moment. Revenues by department.
This is page 231.
Okay, so obviously, administration does not earn enterprise fees.
Right, that's.
Nobody plays for the fun of the bureaucracy. But, so that's why Oyster Point and Pillar Point receive revenue for that. The property tax, which is allocated to the departments using the following methodology. Am I on your point?
Now I'm even more confused.
Okay.
I would
Sorry.
say I am too.
Let's try again.
Do you understand?
I don't want to not answer your question.
Okay,
I think,
so.
Glenn, can you go to the public enterprise section, and that may, I think what Commissioner Brennan is asking is,
Where's this one?
this is divided by department. Is there an equivalent chart that shows this information by public and enterprise?
Yes, there is.
No, there's not, because
Oh.
I agree, that there's not, because that's actually, there is an equivalent
Let me
it's-
see
in
if I
terms of
can find it.
information, but that's something that I was going to bring up as
Are you looking
well.
for it in table form or graphic form?
Well, I'm talking about graph, and I'm usually the table form kind of person, but if you look at 237 through 240, and 242, so 242 actually has your conclusions, and I'm looking at like bullet point number 3, which is resulting allocation more than covers public funds at OPM. The balance of property tax is allocated to PPH to provide additional backfill. And that actually shows up in your chart on page, the financial charts on page 2-37. And I don't know if this is what you're talking about, Sabrina, but I would also like to see a pie chart with similar information that was on page 231. And I would like to see it broken out with public and enterprise funds and the percentages. Because I just did my own little pie chart here, and if you look at OPM enterprise, it's, 15% of this total, and PPA, and OPM public funds is 14%, which substantiates bullet 3 on page 242. Does that make sense, Glenn?
Yeah, I think I
mean, So if I
understand
can
now.
get like a pie chart.
You want a pie chart that reflects that table
that reflects the table and
by department.
reflects the public funds versus enterprise funds. Because right now, you got the bar graph, but I like the percentages that are on page 231. And how can we do that here? So if you look at the total public funds for this entire chart, right? It's
Yes.
6.563 mil, right? And the total enterprise fund is about 4.523, right? And so if you look at the total, that means public funds is 59% of that, and then enterprise is 41%. But the breakout in this financial piece could also be reflected in a pie chart
Yes,
with
by department.
percentages, which would, in my opinion, help substantiate your 3 bullet point conclusions on page 2-42.
We will
Does
be
that
working
kind
on
of
that.
help explain what
if I
you're looking
understand.
for, Sabrina? kind
I
of?
think that information would be helpful. What I want to understand is, I was just talking specifically about administrative, so are you telling me that the revenue for administration, which is 1.4 million, is all public funds? Is that what's?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe saying that on here would be helpful, because it's
It
kind of
does
like,
say that.
where is that money coming from? It's just not clear in this pie chart.
Not in the pie chart, but it's in the narrative, so maybe someplace in the pie chart, you could explain,
You
just
can
make an
there's plenty
asterisk
of
or
blank
something.
space
Oh,
in
when we
there.
do the pie charts to explain that, I understand.
Maybe copy the narrative on the pie chart with regard to administrative
explain.
costs. But anyway, does mine make sense about the pie chart with regard to public funds and enterprise funds?
I believe so.
Okay, if you need extra explanations,
Right.
you can call me.
Okay.
Thanks.
On this 2-31, again, we have the revenues by department for administrative, 1,412,225, 13%. Yet the total of that whole pie is 11,087,221. And we get expenditures, 1,412,225, 13% again. Yet the total expenditures are 15,919,952. So we might have brought over that little graph error or something. whether
Correct,
it's,
correct the pie on page
Which you brought up.
2-31.
2-31.
Right, and you brought that
Thank
up
you.
at our last meeting.
Yeah.
That's why I was paying attention to this particular.
If I understand you correctly, President Matoush, I think that reflects capital expenditures.
Well,
It,
the percentages can't be the same when
When the
denominator
total
is
amount
different.
is different, right?
What is this chart 2-40 telling us? Can you explain it to me?
Well, I'm not, has your question been answered, Tom, because I
I
was,
just made a comment.
okay.
The direction here is to receive the report and to provide direction to staff on additional changes as this commission may recommend. This isn't a voting item, we're just simply letting you know directions, corrections, additional information, and so on that we desire for our follow-up meeting.
Right.
Commissioner, in response to your question, Commissioner Brennan, and the fact that you have to ask it tells us that it doesn't tell the story well enough. So we hear that. But what it should be showing is that all of the revenue in administrative activities being blue is public, all of the administrative revenue is public revenue, i.e. property taxes, et cetera. All of the expenditures in admin, that the blue representing salary and the orange, it looks like to me, representing operating, and there is no capital expenditure proposed for administration.
And operating would mean things like rent or stuff like that?
Correct. Rent, legal, elections,
Right.
a big one you'll be approving later.
And
700 square foot.
So, I mean, a good way, I mean, just a much better picture, because the story in admin is, to me, a little boring, is if you look at 2-39, and perhaps this also could be displayed better, but what we're doing in OPM is we're comparing enterprise revenue to enterprise expenditures, and here you can see the impact of the capital expenditures, which indicate that quite a bit of the capital expenditures is coming out of reserve, not coming from enterprise revenue. If you look at public revenue is balanced with the public expenditures at OPM. In Pillar, again, similar to OPM, the enterprise revenue covers, just as it does at OPM, the basic operating expenses, but falls far short of covering all the capital investment, which is, one side of a two-sided story. The reserves, in fact, are net operating revenue from the past that weren't spent on projects that should have been done. If you look at the public revenue, that is in Pillar Point, which is using the balance of the property tax, and you compare that to the public expenditures, it comes a little closer, but still there are public expenditures on capital, as you can see in the on my chart, it looks sort of a grayish green. You can see that those public expenditures are largely coming out of reserves to a greater extent than at OPM.
Is there a way to get a chart that shows us the total amount of CIP facilities at OPM? And that way we would know, and like what the depreciation is on those facilities, so that we know where we're at as far as the depreciated value that we might owe. Do you understand what I'm asking?
Not exactly.
So we have facilities, and we have a facility survey from Moffett Nickel. So we should know roughly what our facilities there are worth from past CIP projects. It would be great to see a chart that shows how much we've put in facilities and where we're at as far as depreciation goes on those facilities, so we can see where we're at and what we owe. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's just two things there. One is, I haven't used, we don't use depreciation in this presentation, so it would be data I don't have now. I'm not saying that could not be done, but just focusing on getting the budget done, I think that's a note. If the board directs and or the general manager directs. I just want to secondarily say that without direction, I think it's unlikely that staff would do a report for OPM that we didn't also do for PPH and admin.
Well, I'm not suggesting that looking at depreciation at Pillar Point Harbor isn't also useful, but we don't have a JPA that requires that we have to pay back depreciation, so it's not relevant to Pillar Point Harbor because we own the facilities at Pillar Point Harbor.
And you can color me that having a lot to learn. I'm not sure, haven't had it conclusively shown to me that we have a JPA. I'll defer to legal when that is on the agenda, but I haven't had it conclusively shown to me that we have a JPA where we have to pay for depreciation.
Right. The current JPA is the one that we're operating under.
So but you know, if it becomes something that the commission needs to know, I think finance is going to have to get that for you. Sorry.
It's in the JPA. If you read the JPA, it's in there.
I did, and I didn't quite have the same interpretation, but I will totally defer to the manager and council on that. Or I'm sure Anita will as well. Or maybe she'll understand it when she reads it better than
But
I.
it would have really far-reaching financial implications for the district, and it certainly isn't something that we would want to ignore or not plan.
Or if that is correct, it certainly needs to be flushed out.
Yeah, but
There's no
depreciation could
question
be
about it.
across the board too.
And it
It's
may be
not-
something the commission as a group is curious of, even if that's not correct.
Depreciation would go to all of our, like, trucks and all of that. in
And
terms of-
depreciation, I
But,
mean, I'll
it's-
put this, depreciation is not a real cash expense. So I'm not exactly sure.
But in the
It's
terms of the
not.
JPA, it
So-
is a cash expense. That's what I'm pointing out.
Yeah, and that's why that JPA being as clear as mud and why they're trying to write a new one, I'm not exactly sure what they mean when they say that there's a pot of money called depreciation, which needs to be turned over. I don't know that that is actually the intent.
Well,
But
that
I
is
don't
what
want
the
to,
JPA
I don't want to lead that
says.
argument because I'm not the expert.
That is what the JPA says, so I'm just going off of what is written in the
Yeah,
JPA.
well,
And that's not something that we have planned for in our budgeting, and I
No.
think we need to do that.
Well, there's different financial documents also that show depreciation. There's different rules how we document our depreciation,
Straight.
and maybe the budget isn't the place for that.
but I mean, as I understand depreciation, you depreciate assets as they age,
And they're being used.
and they go, and you do an inventory and you correct them for their real value. And then you also do improvements, and when you do improvements on those, you reduce your depreciation. So, for example, if that's what the JPA says, then there would be money, if we don't make improvements, that fund would be bigger. But again, I'm not the expert on what the JPA says.
It's just a very different situation from Pillar Point Harbor, where there's no we don't have to pay anyone because the assets are not at 100%, the facilities aren't at 100%. And we have a JPA ending in 10 years, which, according to various people's interpretation of it, including mine, it indicates that the district is responsible for paying out cash value of the depreciation on those assets or bringing them up to 100% new. Either way, that's a huge expense for the district.
I think that much of that is shown in the capital improvement plan. But let me say, just as a bottom line, and I am in a way kicking the can down the road, one, if that is information the commission needs to have, finance, I'm sure we'll find a way to get it for you. And certainly it becomes necessary if that is the interpretation of the JPA. I mean, if that is the interpretation of JPA, that is information you have to have.
And I'll be,
Thanks.
one last question.
And one last question, because I believe that we provided a lot of good input for staff.
He did.
Yeah.
So this might be more of a philosophical question. So the administrative expenses, I know and the revenues are all coming from public funds, right? It's all, we're dealing with public funds, but not all of our activities are going to the public benefit. I mean, we're managing and doing things for the benefit of the enterprise organization, right?
So you bring up the item which is shown in expenses, which is an allocation
Right.
from Pillar Point and OPM Enterprise
Right,
for offsetting administration.
right. So help me here, Glenn, I don't think that's very clear on something like
Yeah, and
page 2-40.
You're correct. It isn't very clear on that. That graph would not be the graph to demonstrate that.
Right, so can we have a graph that kind of helps separate that and put it into the public funds, the public and enterprise funds section? I mean, I think that,
Yeah, I mean,
what
look.
I meant by refining that.
Looking at Anita, I think that that's something that we'll try to do.
Okay, thanks. That's it, thank you.
I'm Bennigan. Commissioner Bernardo?
I'm just going to make this really quick. I just want to say thank you
Yes.
so much for this document. It is much improved. Over the years, I've seen budgets change and evolve here at the district, and this is one of the best laid out, easy to understand. I know that some of it can be refined, anything can be refined, but this is a really solid document. I want to thank staff for taking the time to really make this easy to understand, not only for the commissioners, but for the members of the public like me who are not accountants and financial gurus and stuff. It's really, I think it's well laid out. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, I believe that winds up discussion item 2. Staff has direction, so moving right on to strategic plan update and next steps. General Manager McGraw.
Thank you, President Mateusz. This commission has adopted the development of a strategic plan as a priority goal. Both the Strategic Planning Committee and the Finance Committee have met during 2016 to review and discuss the development of a request for proposal for the development of a strategic plan. And in December, this commission directed staff to work with PHI consultant Brent Ives on a one-day workshop on the strategic planning process. And that workshop was held on February the 22nd. Out of that workshop, there was a directive to staff to review the work that was done during 2014 by Lisa Weiss Consulting. Staff did that review, and you will find in your package, there is a link to those documents on the website. And also a review of each document in brief, and a document that extracts from each of the documents, the draft infrastructure facilities assessment, the draft financial condition, and the draft fishing community sustainability plan. Extracted from those documents certain sentences, phrases, paragraphs with the idea of trying to demonstrate what that document was all about. In the body of the staff report, I addressed each one of those in brief. The infrastructure facilities assessment addressed sea level rise, circulation and parking, wet and emergency preparedness, marine infrastructure and harbor facilities assessment, both at PPH and at OPM, and water quality. In reviewing it, I determined that the assessment was comprehensive and provided useful information that can inform the district going forward. The traffic analysis and levels of service is very much a snapshot in time, would need to be redone for any specific project requiring such an analysis. The facilities condition sections prepared separately for OPM and PPH by Moffett and Nickel were prepared based on inspections in February and March of 2014. That's over 3 years ago. The majority of that work was actually completed as part of a contract directly with the district that was incorporated into the LWC, the Lisa Weiss consulting work, but then was supplemented through a portion of the fees paid to Lisa Weiss Consulting. Looking at that, staff does not recommend including a new facilities assessment as a part of the strategic plan. There was also a draft financial condition assessment. It addressed statewide industry trends, the district's financial picture, debt retirement, employment analysis, and a regional comparison. In short, it determined that our rates were not lower than anybody else's, not higher than anybody else's. Our staffing ratios are not unusual, but our financial picture is certainly healthier than many other harbors. It identified that there are revenue opportunities in the visitor-serving areas, and a successful brand or marketing campaign could boost tourism-related revenues at PPH. Clearly, the analysis in that report of our debt service is no longer relevant, as we paid off that debt in April of 2016. Consequently, staff does not recommend including a new financial condition assessment as part of the strategic plan either. The Lisa Weiss work also included a draft fishing community sustainability plan. This plan, while the other assessments were OPM and PPH, this plan was specific to the commercial fishing industry at PPH. And it builds on a series of plans developed for other ports and harbors in the region, San Diego, Monterey, Morro Bay. The plans are actually a requirement for those fishing communities engaged in limited entry groundfish trawl fishery under the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries and Conservation Act. Considerable amount of useful data in the plan, but a lot of the data is, of course, now dated, hasn't been updated in a number of years. I have spoken with the Half Moon Bay Seafood Marketing Association about what they would like to see out of this draft plan, and their comment was fundamentally that while it is a draft plan, nobody has ever felt the necessity to, no regulatory agency has ever asked for a copy of our fishing community sustainability plan, and that they don't see the lack of that having been finalized as an impediment to any of the work that they want to do. Consequently, staff does not recommend including a fishing community sustainability plan as part of our strategic plan either. Then in February, this commission participated in a one-day strategic planning workshop facilitated by Brent Ives. As I said, one of the directives out of that was this review of the work product that came out of Lisa Weiss Consulting. And I think the biggest takeaway from that meeting was that it's a process. It requires a robust public outreach program. And then the next step after the development of the strategic plan, be development of site-specific master plans for both facilities. There was discussion at that workshop about the next steps and how to move forward with the development of a strategic plan. The one would be the issuance of a request for proposals. That process did start in 2016 with work of the Strategic Planning Committee that was then reviewed by the Finance Committee and by the board. And so I took that work, that RFP from then, based on my reading of the Lisa Wise work, the discussions that this commission had on the February 22nd meeting, I crafted adopted the RFP language to more suitably reflect what I believe to be the desires of this commission. That's also included in your board package there.
Right.
So the options at this point, in order to move forward with a strategic plan, would be to review that draft request for proposals, amend it or adopt it as written, and direct staff to issue that. You can direct staff to craft a different request for proposals and return to the committee or this commission prior to publication. Or you could find that due to prior history and experience with the district, that you find that competition for consultants is not in the district's best interest, and you could direct staff to solicit a proposal directly from and then negotiate a contract with BHI Consulting, Brent Ives, and return to this commission prior to the execution of any agreement.
He's also recommended 2 other firms.
He did. He did create a report that was included in your board package, where he said that if you wanted to issue an RFP, here are a couple of firms that he knows of, and we could certainly ensure that those firms are identified in any outreach for the RFP process, and make sure that they are proactively notified so that we can get proposals from them if they so choose to submit. With that, I'm happy to go through any of the data presented. The draft RFP that is in your staff report, page 3-43. And then subsequent to that is the template of a professional services agreement that begins on page 3-56 that we could include with the request for proposal so that any responding entity would know exactly the agreement that they would be expected to execute. So, happy to answer any questions about next steps of the strategic plan.
Mr. Chain-Crowell.
Thank you. Steve, thanks for this report. I just wanted to ask you about attachment 4, which is the draft fishing community sustainability plan. I kind of looked at it maybe in a different way than perhaps you did. I was looking at it from an economic projections, really the plan talks about economic, environmental, and social performance. You know, the narrative is built around that, and I was primarily looking at that from an economic and financial standpoint, because part of our fishing industry is, I would put it under the category of enterprise, under the enterprise umbrella.
Yes.
And so I'm just wondering, and maybe it's an obsolete situation because this is a picture in kind.
Yes.
And that's a fluid, the fishing industry and the dynamics around that is a fluid situation. But couldn't we put something in there with a focus on economics and finance, not just from the enterprise perspective, but we just did a whole fee waiver for the bad crab season. And I don't know if this could even capture that kind of I don't even know if it's information, but what we could use as a tool to discuss this in our plan that's gonna go out further than, next year, I guess. Does that make any sense at all?
Sort of like an economic impact analysis of
Maybe
the
something
fishing industry.
that shows that that industry can be burdened with different cycles in the environment or whatever, right? And so that's going to affect our revenues and our expenses if we, for example, have to waive fees again. And I'm just putting that out there because that's what happened during the year and a half that I've been on the board. So it's the only example I have. So I don't know if that's, I mean, I'm looking at it probably a little different from the way this has been presented, and I'm wondering if that's something that might be beneficial for us to include in a strategic plan. And maybe call it something else, I don't know.
Certainly, we can include anything in the document that you wish, but based on my understanding of the conversation at the workshop, that might be a directive to come out of the strategic plan, much like the master plan.
Okay.
The development of a master plan would come out of that strategic planning process. Maybe the development of an economic impact analysis of the fishing industry at Pillow Point would be a further work product subsequent to the development of the strategic plan.
And so I'm
Does that
not
make sense?
just picking on the fishing industry, that's just what's in here. So it could be any
Yeah.
other thing too
Right.
that has a financial and economic impact to the harbor district.
The other big one, of course, might be tourism.
Right, right.
Tourism
And I don't
impact
know,
analysis.
I mean, that's a big picture thing that maybe
Yeah.
we should consider.
Several of us have been talking about a strategic plan for a long time. Staff's recommendation and motion is to either do the RFP or sole source, and I believe these answers would be answered during the development of the strategic plan. The question
That's
before the
true.
board
That's
is,
true.
are we going to proceed with the RFP or are we going to sole source? Not what's in all these documents and how
Okay.
they're gonna be reworked.
Thank you for getting me
Commissioner
back on
Brennan.
focus.
Well, like I've said before, I definitely support the RFP process. I think it's gonna be a healthy process for the board and the staff, and I think we're gonna learn things from the applicants and their knowledge that we wouldn't learn otherwise. And I think that Brent has given us a couple of good firms that we would want to make sure are aware of an RFP, and I think there's a lot of other great firms in the Bay Area and maybe even outside the Bay Area that would be interested in responding. And I think that this RFP is written in a way that's very different from our last RFP for a strategic plan, and it's much more succinct, and I think that we're going to get a lot more interest from firms that would want to work on this as opposed to what happened last time, where it was such a convoluted RFP that was very, very long and complicated and encompassed all kinds of things that really have nothing to do with the strategic plan. And so nobody wanted to respond to it. So I think we're in a completely different situation now. I think Steve has done some good work in assessing what has been done to date and then putting that all together in a way that it's going to be easy for these firms to respond. So I think we're set up to go with the RFP process. There's a couple of suggestions I would make on this proposed RFP. I don't have that many changes that I would suggest. I think that the main thing that jumped out, and maybe I missed it because I kind of skimmed it, was it doesn't, at least I didn't see, and maybe you can point out where it is included, it really doesn't get into asking them for specifics on how they would envision doing the public outreach component. So I think maybe we could clarify that and make sure that they make it really clear, because that was one thing that was not handled very well last time. And I think we need to make it clear to the applicant that they've got to give us a really concrete plan for public outreach. It doesn't have to be set in stone, but show us that they know how to do it. And then the other thing that jumped out at me was there is a mention of sea level rise in here, which is something that we haven't been planning for yet and clearly is going to impact both locations, and something that the county is very focused on. And I also think that while it is mentioned, we could possibly emphasize that, because one of the things that I think this RFP does is it asks the respondents to look at ways that we might grow our district down the road, and meaning possibly provide more benefit to the county on the bay side, which I don't think is a bad idea to look at. But one area where there's going to be a growing need is in response to sea level rise planning. And there may be some opportunities for the Harbor District to partner up with some of the cities and other communities in ways that address bay access with relation to levees and sea level rise planning and facilities that have to be built going forward. So I think that I'm not saying that the strategic plan needs to do a lot with that, but I think that maybe we want to mention a sentence or two that is an area of potential exponential growth for the district, because this county is surrounded by water, and of all of the counties in California, San Mateo County is one of the two most impacted by sea level rise, Orange County being the other county, and San Mateo County is the #1 most impacted. So that's something that I think we should definitely be thinking about going forward.
We do have a public comment on this. Bud Ratz, please.
I agree with Commissioner Matoush. This process has been going on for years, and we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you go out and get a proposal again, you're probably going to get an RFP, and the response is going to be in the range of $100,000 to $200,000. And it is really critical. I think the timing, given the things in terms of the JPA and renegotiating that this process get underway, because you can't effectively renegotiate a JPA, which is going to run multi-years into the future without a strategic plan. So I would really encourage you to go after the second option. And what this would enable, if you struck the agreement with Ives correctly, is that a planning process is like a flower. It unfolds, and you can get timetables and control points into that process, where if you want to put additional things into the process, you can, but if you want to govern the process down and pull it in, that you can. And I would really encourage, rather than leaving open end in terms of getting a response back from staff, that you set the goal to have that response from staff back at your June meeting. I think this is really one of the most important things that you as commissioners have before you at this point in time. Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment when it's my turn. I think Robert's got something.
Commissioner Navarro.
I think I'm going to keep mine very brief. I think where most strategic plans, and I've worked with lots of them in my government work outside the Harbor District. I think where a lot of strategic plans fail is that the strategic planner doesn't put communications in the plan. Like, in other words, once you're done with the plan, how do you communicate that plan? How does the public know about it? And that weaves into also the public outreach. And so no one knows what the plan is. They don't understand what it means. They can't decipher it. So I think the communications piece is really important. So I would put somewhere in there, you know, in addition to what they're going to, and I don't really care who does it personally, but in there somewhere that address communications, like how are you gonna have quarterly check-ins with the commissioners and let the commissioners know how the plan is, you know, proceeding and that type of thing. So I think communication is important. That, I cannot emphasize that enough. That's where it will fall apart. Thank you.
Commissioner Brennan.
Thank you. So I hear, you know, the public's concern about moving the process along, and I too want to see it happen sooner than later because it is definitely holding us up. But on the other hand, we've only ever received one proposal for a strategic plan at this agency. And there are some amazing planning firms out there, and they don't charge $100,000. I mean, I can think of several special districts that I know of that have done strategic plans in the neighborhood of $20,000 to $50,000, and they've gotten a good plan in the end. So I know it's possible, and they went out for RFP. I think that it's really important to learn from the talent that's out there, and the only way that you can do that is if you get their proposals. It helps educate us as a board, and it helps educate the staff, and it also allows the public to be part of the process. So I feel really strongly about that, and I have some concerns about how this will be handled if it's just handed off to this consultant that we've spoken with.
Commissioner Lorenz and I both took some classes with Martin Roush, and he was well-spoken during those classes. So I'm just looking for a way to, I'd like to entertain a motion and a second to proceed one way or another so we can direct staff.
Well, I'll move to do option 2. Due to the prior history and experience with the district, the commission finds that competition for a consultant is not in the district's best interest and directs staff to solicit a proposal from and negotiate a contract with BHI Consulting, Brent Ives, and return to this commission prior to execution of any agreement. That's my motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Roll call.
Commissioner Bernardo?
Aye.
Commissioner Brennan?
No.
Commissioner Chankrali?
Aye.
Commissioner Lorenz?
No.
Commissioner Mathush?
No.
Then I'll
May
make,
I have another motion, please?
Yes, I will make a motion to go out for RFP.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Ritchie?
You get a second on that?
Yes, I'll
Yes.
Oh,
second.
thank you. And for clarification, I'm sorry, before you vote, Commissioner Brennan, you made a couple of comments about things that you would like to see in here. I would point you to, let's see,
Did I miss something?
yeah, page 3-45, item 2, a robust and well-managed public outreach program. And then page 3-46, item 5E, or Roman numeral 5E, identify a strategy for addressing climate change-related sea level rise concerns in district facilities.
I saw that, but could we also maybe put in, like, I'd leave it to staff to figure out, like, a little emphasis on the fact that there is gonna be a growing need for that regionally, and that we might have a role to play in that.
Boost emphasis on that, but you're comfortable with staff doing that?
Yeah,
Okay.
The other thing is, we're not trying to design the plan here. We're trying to bring somebody in to help us
Exactly.
develop a
I
plan.
agree.
Right.
Roll call.
President Mathush?
Aye.
Commissioner Lorenz?
Aye.
Commissioner Chankrali?
aye.
Commissioner Brennan?
Aye.
Commissioner Bernardo?
Aye.
Thank you, folks. We've
Thank
taken a
you,
great
thank
big
you.
step forward, and I thank everyone on the commission for doing that. All right, item 4, recommendations from the Finance Committee. Mr. Lazoff.
The Finance Committee has only one recommendation. Staff thought there were more, but the committee speaks with a united voice that there was only one recommendation, and that one is before you now. That was a recommendation, and I think I will allow the committee to articulate that in their own words, that a cost-benefit study be done, and that study, that there be no further discussions with the city of South San Francisco until that study was complete. I don't think there's any disagreement about the need for a cost-benefit study on whatever is ultimately agreed to. And I also believe that it is appropriate, of course, for the Finance Committee to look at something that has large financial consequences. But this is largely the purview of the Oyster Point Liaison Committee. And so I think that the next place for the Finance Committee recommendation to go is to the Oyster Point Liaison Committee, which could look at it, accept the recommendation, modify the recommendation, and then make its own recommendation to the commission. So that was my suggestion, and also agreed to by the general manager that, that would be appropriate to send it to on to the other committee. But I'll let the committee members advocate their recommendation to the full commission on their own, because I know they'll be more articulate.
Well, prior to receiving their report, I would say that it'd be appropriate to say, taking a step forward, and we'll cancel the May meeting that we have set up with the liaison committee in Oyster Point as a first step forward. But I think there'd be more discussion required as to not getting into any discussions while this other survey is being conducted. Could we hear from the Finance Committee?
You want to go first?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, so we didn't know quite how to get this in front of the board, and if we should have directed it to the liaison committee, it didn't occur to us, so it wasn't an intentional slight. I just want to make sure that's clear. We just wanted to get the concern out there and try to help move the process with an economic analysis forward, because it seemed apparent that the committee members on the liaison committee were struggling a little bit, and I'm thinking of Commissioner Corrali trying to get a better grip on the financial details of the last liaison committee meeting, and I think probably the public would feel the same way. At least that's the feedback I've gotten. And so it seemed to make sense to just kind of stop everything and recognize that we haven't gotten an economic analysis yet, and that it would be super helpful for the staff, for the public, and for the board to get sort of a benchmark for where things are at from a economic analysis standpoint. And obviously we need a qualified firm to help us with that, because our staff is too busy working on other things. And I think there's some great firms out there in the Bay Area, and we should be able to find somebody, hopefully, who can help us get clear on a lot of these questions. So I could go over the recommended motion that came from the committee. Do you want to read it, Ed?
You can read it, but I'd like to add one more thing, and that is that having this document will put the liaison committee in a much better position to negotiate that contract.
You mean the JPA
Yeah.
provision, not a contract
The
necessarily?
JPA.
A
the agreement.
JPA or a management agreement.
Yeah, whatever it is, but.
Whatever it is.
It will help you quite a bit.
So, yeah, we're looking at it as a resource, and you kind of think that by now we would already have this document, because it's not as if we didn't know this was coming, but we don't have it, and so it seems like a good time to do it now. And so what we came up with as a proposed motion is that the district commission an analysis of enterprise and non-enterprise revenue and expenditures at Oyster Point Marina, a cost-benefit analysis of the activities to include zip code information of marina users, an analysis of the tax rate history beginning prior to the JPA, an analysis of the capital investments at OPM and the sources of funding for that investment. Finally, that there be no further discussion with the City of South San Francisco or the other Oyster Point Development Corporation until the report is completed and considered. I think I added one word that isn't there, other, so I'll retract that. So it reads, the last sentence, finally, that there is no further discussion with the City of South San Francisco or the Oyster Point Development Corporation until the report is completed and considered. And just to add to that, one of the things that I learned when I was at the Oyster Point Development public presentation recently, where they talked about their project, they had a chart, which I took a picture of, and it showed the phased development plan, and they talked about completing the construction on the recapping and the building of the new road at Oyster Point as being completed in, I think it was July of 2018. It was the summer of 2018. And so I was looking at that with one of the OPD consultants, that's Oyster Point Development, and I was asking him, you know, well, this is so super helpful to see this, you know, this phased schedule, but what about the biotech part? When is that gonna be built? And he told me that it depends on the market and whether or not the market goes soft, or, you know, basically what he was telling me is, and I didn't know this previously, was that there is no current plan to immediately build that facility. What they're doing is they're preparing the property for a facility eventually. So it's definitely a longer-term sort of phase project than I realized. And so I asked him, I said, well, could we get the phasing so we know when the actual build-out is gonna happen? And he said, well, we don't even know yet. It may turn out to be mixed residential and biotech. And I said, I thought the residential was just gonna be, you know, off of our area, or what used to be our area. And he said, no, actually, we're considering potentially doing some residential at Oyster Point Marina area, and which of course would change sort of the land use and have all kinds of implications. So it sounds like things are getting sorted out, and it's hard to say exactly how long they'll get sorted out. But I think if we're working with a firm that can help us with an economic analysis, they'll be able to track down that data and give us a better big picture as to what the scheduling for this and phasing of this project actually is, and then we'll be able to make better financial decisions for the district based on having, you know, accurate data. And I think that's really what this is about, is just having fact, you know, and working from a fact-based place. So that was pretty much all I had.
I have a public comment from Bud Ratz.
I was originally going to do it on E1. I don't think it's a jurisdictional issue between the Finance Committee and the Liaison Committee. I think the Commission has an obligation that if it enters into negotiations, to be informed. And there are certain things that at this point in time, the information does not really exist. To the depreciation discussion earlier, the clause in the JPA on termination says, quote, all assets at the project site paid for from operating revenues shall become the property of the city. City shall succeed to the depreciation reserve fund, which shall be held in trust and used only for capital and replacements. Also, in subsequent agreements, there's mentions of other reserve funds for excess operating revenues and so on. And so I think it'd be that one of the things that need to be done, in addition to the things that the Finance Committee has said, is just getting the basic information to be a good negotiator. And you know, that's a responsibility that you have as commissioner, to discharge your fiduciary responsibility and to be good negotiators. But one of the most important thing is what rights and et cetera accrue to the commission, and what liabilities and other things in terms of the legal aspects of the existing JPA and subsequent agreements. What is your stand? I mean, what is your standing? Not your opinion, but just your plain legal standing. Where do you stand? Do you stand, you know, where? I think it's extremely important that that be determined before, you know, you go further. It's just good negotiations. And you guys, I think, have leverage. People have mentioned that, well, if you don't go along, that the county and other people will dissolve that. Just to think, I think the city of South San Francisco needs you operating that marina, because that marina is important to the development, and you're getting no benefits from that development, and they need an operator for that. Where are they going to get one? And I think the simple solution for the commission would be just to sign an operating agreement and have the city of South San Francisco, who's benefiting from the improved marina, et cetera, make the capital investment. But before you can really determine positions like that, you need the factual information underlying the situation, which today does not exist.
Well, personally, I don't see why we can't be looking towards getting that information. However, I'm also personally against saying there will be no further discussion with the city of South San Francisco or Oyster Point development until the report is complete and considered. We have somebody from the city manager's office, and I think she would confer that they're not gonna suddenly run out and create an agreement right now. The Harbor District and our legal counsel is not gonna run out and craft an agreement right now. There's a lot of back work to examine, and we're not setting any agreements now. So I don't see these things as mutually exclusive.
Right.
Personally, I see we could be in discussion. We have these 1 or 2 hour meetings, and we move the finance portion forward. We move closer and closer towards an agreement, and we're also gonna have feedback back and forth. The liaison committee does not craft the agreement.
Right.
We'll be participants, but everybody has to okay this thing. So that's my opinion.
So I have a question for you, because I agree with you. So would you consider alternative 1, which would be request staff to come back to commission with a proposal for either an in-house or outside consultant to perform cost-benefit analysis and other committee recommended studies? And I'm assuming you mean Finance Committee recommended studies or Oyster Point Liaison Committee? I don't know. Which committee? 1, but allowed discussions with the city of SSF and others to proceed with the understanding that prior to any final agreement, a full analysis must be completed. So which committee are you talking about in this alternative 1? Finance Committee recommended studies or Oyster Point? I'm assuming it's the Finance Committee I don't know.
Well, maybe I can jump in here a little, Glenn. I didn't write the staff report, but, yeah, staff does not disagree with the idea of doing a cost-benefit analysis, and we're soliciting proposals for a consultant to do just that.
I brought that up in the meeting, and
Yeah.
in a subsequent committee, commission meeting that I would actually not encourage an in-house study. I would actually go with an outside
Absolutely.
consultant.
We concur.
Independent consultant.
We concur.
Right, but not in,
That's a really.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, and I don't know, but it says, and other recommended, committee recommended studies.
Oh,
And which committee is that?
yeah, what did you mean by that?
No, I mean, I think it was the committee's recommendation. My thinking is, there's 2 ways you can go. You can refer it to the liaison committee to decide what to do with it, or you as a commission right now, you could decide which committee it is. So that's fine. Now, either of those helps direct us. And then there's the issue of whether or not any discussions take place.
I have a question. So what I just heard our general manager say is that our staff is already doing what?
Soliciting proposals for an economic
Benefit
analysis of
yeah.
specifically capital investments and long-term future of
So-
the Oyster Point Marine.
So when would you, any timeline on when something would come back to the board for consideration?
Well, if it's under $25,000, I would just select a consultant based upon their skills and experience, looking at any other issues around conflicts or anything like that, and move forward. If it's over 25,000, I'd bring it back to the board.
Well, I know I would like to hear from a consultant right away as to what exactly it is they plan to do, and I think the public would want to know that too. So would they, if it's under 25,000 and staff selects the consultant, would there be a presentation to the board so that we understand what's happening?
It could be, certainly.
I mean, I would think that would be helpful to
Yeah.
everyone.
I'd be interested in that one as well.
Yeah, okay.
so we could make that happen
Yeah,
quickly.
absolutely.
So it sounds like that is resolving the concerns of the finance committee for the most part. I mean, I personally would be more comfortable if we not continue to carry on these liaison committee meetings without having all that fact-based information in front of us. I just don't see the point in that, but if the liaison committee wants to do it, I'm not gonna stand in their way. I do think, though, that these liaison committee meetings have got to be noticed as special meetings, because when they're not, we can and have, run into issues with the Brown Act. And I know that I personally plan to attend every liaison committee meeting unless there's some health issue or some reason that I can't. So I'm just putting that out there now, that I will be there, and I believe probably other commissioners want to attend too. So we really need to make sure that these meetings, these liaison committee meetings are noticed, appropriately, because it's so important to the future of the district, how this all gets resolved. I think it's, it's just not surprising that people want to attend, and the public's been attending as well.
I think, if I might, on that, just as a point, if that is, and I'm not arguing against doing that, but if you are going to do that, then I think in fact, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but it would seem that it's then a committee of the whole. Not just.
I think you're pausing differences here. We are currently working under an agreement that we all consider to be outdated. However, that agreement calls for the establishment of a liaison committee.
Yes, and
Oh, you mean the full committee with both city
Yes.
and us?
Right.
I was thinking about, for example, in
Then
kicking
we've
this
got a
proposal
separate-
would be to the committee that consists of our representatives only.
Right.
The liaison committee.
Right.
We've got,
Right.
we've
Which
got
per-
our Oyster Point Committee, and then we've got the liaison committee, which is with 2 members of the
Each
city
governing
council.
board.
And those are governed by the JPA, how
Yes.
you set those up.
Right.
And just to be clear, it's my understanding that when the liaison committee meets from the Harbor District, meaning just our 2 committee members, that those committee meetings have been noticed as special meetings, correct?
They've been noticed as committee.
As liaison
As
committee meetings.
Yes.
Okay.
Not special
And
meeting.
I think that moving forward, the JPA says whatever the JPA says, and I think we all agree it's completely outdated and not very functional. And I realize that it specs out this format for liaison committee meetings, but I think given where we're at with the JPA, meaning we only have 10 years left, we're at a point where both boards should be talking to each other in a special meeting format. And I can tell you right now, I plan to be at every single one of those meetings. So please notice it as a special meeting. And I would think that anyone else on the city council that wants to attend that's not on the liaison committee technically should be able to come, just like any other commissioners that are not on the liaison committee should be able to attend. So we need to make sure that that is all being noticed properly.
Well, the recommendation I'm comfortable rolling forward is cost-benefit analysis for Oyster Point Marina, and instead of saying required prior to any, I would say will be performed during further discussion with the city of South San Francisco, so that the items are not mutually exclusive, and we don't sit here and at the end of 4 years, we still don't have an
Right,
agreement.
So is that,
do we
is
need to
that
vote on this, or
alternative
is
one?
staff already doing that? Because it sounds like staff's already working on it, right?
So
On
are you for
cost
this
benefit?
alternative
Yeah.
one?
Yes.
The economic analysis.
And the zip code analysis, we've got that done.
And I'm sure that
Yeah.
whoever you end up working with will probably have some other ideas
Yes.
of things that need to be done as well.
Sounds like it's a done deal.
Okay, is staff clear on this?
Yes.
Almost done, the motion.
We don't need a motion, this is a recommendation.
Oh.
And
So
are we
what
clear
was the
on how
recommendation?
we're gonna notice meetings appropriately, so there's not a Brown Act violation?
There needs to be board direction.
Right, so. how
Well,
is
it's
that
not
different from
board
the change of
direction,
what?
it's following the Brown Act, and the Brown Act requires that these meetings be noticed as special meetings when you have, more than 2 commissioners show up. Just like if you have an event or workshop where more than 2 commissioners are gonna show up, you must notice it as a special meeting, and that is the standard, that is how.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing with that.
Okay.
So
So can I
let me
just
jump in for
ask
1
a-
minute to provide a little legal clarification. If the desire is to have the entire board attend what was heretofore the liaison committee meetings, or a majority of the board, I think two things would need to happen. First is, you're correct, it would have to be called as a special meeting of this commission. That can be accomplished by either the board president or a majority of the board can set a special meeting, but staff cannot set a special meeting of the district as a whole. I think the second thing that would have to happen, I would imagine, would be the cooperation of the city in that effort, for scheduling purposes, because otherwise, you would call a meeting and nobody would come. So it's a little more complicated, but it is not possible for one commissioner to direct the calling of a special meeting
Right.
except for President Matoush.
I just
Okay,
thought it was
can I-
appropriate meeting noticing, and maybe we need to check with the city to see, because there's probably
I have a question.
city council people that are interested as well.
Perhaps, but under the Brown
I'm
Act,
not comfortable.
a special meeting for the whole board can be called either by the board president or by a majority of the board.
Yeah, but we do have to notice things properly, and if people are showing up, it needs to be noticed properly.
But you can't notice a special meeting. You don't make a meeting of this commission happen just by noticing it. It has
If
to
you
be.
know that it's the responsibility of the president, if he knows that more than 2 commissioners are gonna show up, the meeting is supposed to be noticed as a special meeting.
No.
That is the role of the president to make sure that that's taken care of. So
But that's not the meeting.
Well, I
The
believe that
meeting
under
is
the
of the
current
liaison
JPA
committee.
that we have a structure for a committee meeting.
Right.
What we could do is, if and when we schedule another meeting, we could entertain that as a topic on the agenda.
Good idea.
For discussion.
I agree.
Of the liaison committee.
Yes.
That agenda, which
Yes.
agenda?
Yeah, I think,
There was
yeah.
one.
And
Yeah.
I hear that.
I will want to speak to that topic at the meeting. I will speak to that
Well,
topic.
so
Are we-
that's the danger that I'm
Okay.
concerned about.
Are we clear about liaison committee, the joint meeting, or just our piece?
We're talking about the joint
Okay.
committee, and I think President Matoush's idea of agendizing a discussion of that as joint meetings of this board and the South City Council
Can
would be
you
a
just-
proper topic for that,
I
for
believe
that
that
meeting.
we've,
Can you please reread what you're saying, what you want?
cost-benefit analysis for Oyster Point Marina will be performed during further discussion with the city of South San Francisco.
And I concur with
Now
that.
moving on to item 5, procurement and purchasing policy.
Is that a vote?
Anita
Just direction.
Just a
will be
recommendation.
up on this one, and Mr. Lazoff. Anita Pyle, Glenn Lazoff.
Am I on here?
Okay. This is, yeah, both of us.
Oh, procurement
On
policy.
the procurement and purchasing policy, our current district's purchasing policy is 19 years old, and therefore, we have asked council to vet it carefully and make sure we weren't violating state law or exposing ourselves to challenges. So it's been revised thoroughly, and we've provided additional materials. I think Debbie has handed them out. And if you have any questions as to the revisions, I believe Steve Miller is available to answer. Right, isn't that what you said?
I can always try to answer questions, but
I will just add that before Steve goes, that the resolution, unlike a previous version that was pulled from the agenda, both cleans up the ordinance, so we don't have an ordinance that possibly says one thing and a policy that says the other, and that procedures, if you act today, staff will then begin working on the procedures to be approved by the general manager.
I move to approve resolution 1705, rescinding chapter 2.35 of the ordinance code, contracting and purchasing procedures, and adopting revised and restated purchasing and procurement policy.
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, I'm going to call for a roll call, noting that Commissioner Chang Corrali is not in the room. I guess.
Okay, Commissioner Brennan,
Aye.
Commissioner Lorenz,
Aye.
Commissioner Matoush,
Aye.
Commissioner Bernardo.
Aye.
Everybody please pat themselves on the back.
Thank you for that.
Okay, item 6, California Governor's Office of Emergency Service, financial assistance for the Pillar Point Harbor Emergency Launch Ramp dredging and West Trail rehabilitation projects. Staff report, Mr. Mudd.
This is a motion to adopt Resolution 1706, authorizing a California Office of Emergency Services application for financial assistance through the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The Board of Harbor Commissioners resolution is required for the district to move forward in the application process. In March, Governor Brown's request was approved, and a state of emergency for San Mateo County was set in response to damage from powerful storms that struck in January and February. The order made federal assistance available to supplement state and local recovery efforts on a cost-sharing basis in areas affected by the heavy rainfall. District staff acted quickly to document damage the district sustained. It was determined that the district may be eligible for emergency relief funds for a dredge episode at the Pillar Point Harbor launch ramp due to the rapid sediment accumulation from Deer Creek outfall caused by the storms, the West Trail mudslides, which caused partial trail closure, and the damage to the adjacent parking lot may also qualify for funding. On May 5th, district staff met on site with FEMA Program Delivery Manager, California Office of Emergency Services Site Inspector, and other agency representatives for a recovery scoping meeting to determine eligibility for potential FEMA funding. There is also potential funding available for staff labor costs associated with debris removal, equipment costs, engineering work, consulting fees, and project management. FEMA funds would potentially cover 75% of the damage repair costs, 25% could come from California Office of Emergency Services, and staff would return to the board for approval for accepting the terms of any emergency funding the district qualifies for. So staff recommends that this commission adopt Resolution 1705, allowing the district to move forward with the California Office of Emergency Services application for emergency financial assistance through FEMA.
I move that we adopt Resolution 1706, authorizing a California Office of Emergency Services application for financial assistance through Federal Emergency Management Agency.
I second that, and just for clarification, Mr. Moran, you said 1705. It should be 1706.
Yeah, I'm sorry, 1706. I said 1703 for the beginning.
I second that.
No further discussion. I'd like to call for a roll call.
Commissioner Bernardo?
Aye.
Commissioner Brennan?
Aye.
Commissioner Chankralli?
Aye.
Commissioner Lorenz?
Aye.
Commissioner Mathush?
Aye. Okay, item 7 on the agenda, nominations for California Special District Association Board of Directors. Staff report, or do we want to run anybody, or?
This is optional for this commission. We are members of the CSDA. There is an opening on the board. This is for nomination to the board. A ballot will return to this commission for voting. Any of the commissioners or any executive staff are eligible to be nominated for election. Executive staff has no interest in running for this office, but should any commissioner wish to run, we put your name in the hat.
I'm not seeing everybody jumping up and down here.
In that case, no action is necessary. Thank you.
So I guess we'll pass on item 7. Moving right on to item E, number 1, Oyster Point Marina Joint Powers Agreement and Economic Analysis Discussion. Commissioner Brennan?
We've already talked about this a good bit, so I'm not going to say much. And I appreciate the discussion that happened previously in this meeting. There are some comments you can read for yourself here on my reasons for why I think it's so important that we get an economic analysis. I'm really glad that the board is moving in that direction. And there was an article in the Daily Journal today on page 5 titled "Official Favors Oyster Point Financial Forecast," which I had no idea I was going to get a call about from a reporter yesterday. So apparently the Daily Journal is following this to some extent, and I just look forward to getting, meeting whoever is going to be this consultant and finding out more about what it is that they're going to do for us. And I hope that our legal counsel will also provide clarity to the board about some of these issues related to depreciation and what's owed, and how to correctly read the JPA. So I think that's going to keep coming up for the district, so we've got to get a handle on it.
I just want to make a quick comment.
Right?
I just want to thank, I got some emails, a couple of emails from members of the public, and I just want to thank them for giving me their views. Because I think it's important, and I'm glad that they're being proactive.
Okay, this would be the time when we discuss or have action on pulled consent items. So the first item that was pulled was item 1, bills and claims.
Give me a
Commission
second.
discussion.
I have a comment. We received a bill from the General Elections Division for the elections, which is close to $800,000. I thought I'd mention that keep it on the record for public review. And since I'm the treasurer, I have the luxury, arguably the joy of looking at this in some detail. And a large portion of that cost is for printing. And I was dismayed at the huge number that the elections board decided to charge us. I think it's outrageous. That, in my view, it should not cost that much, and I'll just leave it at that at the moment. The other point I'd like to make is that personally, I received a bill from the elections office for printing costs in the order of, I can't remember the exact number, but $3,000. All of us that ran for the 2-year seat received a bill. Those that ran for the 4-year seat received a refund. And so for the public, it's a little bit discouraging that you end up paying in the order of $6,000 or more, closer to $8,000 to run for a 2-year seat, and much less for a 4-year seat. So again, this is an election office printing thing that makes absolutely no sense, and I'm just putting it out in the record for the election office to realize that I'm not happy about it.
So Ed, have
Parallel
you,
to what Commissioner Lorenz is saying, I'd be real interested to find out what was the Half Moon Bay City Council charged, what were some of the other special districts
Right.
charged, and I'd really like to see a ranking of the 5-member boards and how their cost from Harbor Commission, whether we talk about Montera Water and Sanitary or some, there's a number of local things I'd really like to see benchmarked. My
Yes.
own comment.
Yeah, thank
so
you.
quick question, have y'all gotten refunds for those of us who ran for the 4-year seat? Did you get a refund? Because I haven't gotten
I
any.
got a refund.
Oh, well, maybe I should be talking to the
think
elections
you
office
should.
about mine.
Yeah, you should.
You should, because
Because I thought I was expecting it months ago. Okay.
I
Yeah.
don't mind.
yeah.
I was a little confused about Cox, Wooten, Lerner, Griffin, and Hanson. I thought that they kept dripping and drabbing things in, and we said, absolutely, we won't see another one.
I'll address that one, but let the general manager talk about elections.
If I may, I'd be very interested in finding out about this refund and individual costs and the disparity between 2-year and 4-year seats.
Well, it's,
I can speak briefly to the matter of how the costs are determined. and it's by registered voter within the district, and we are a countywide district. So we basically pay for the election the same amount as the county pays.
Right.
And other smaller districts will pay much less because there are many fewer registered voters within district
Right,
boundaries.
that's the difference. Right. My thing was the
I did
refund.
bring this to the CSDA chapter meeting last month, or was it earlier this month, to bring it up amongst other CSDA members here in the county. The CSDA district representative was at that meeting. She is going to bring back at the next meeting some of their legislative staff who are going to research a little bit about this. Because I basically said, with, you know, just a couple of commissioners running, for us to pay the same amount as the county when there are 17
Right.
initiatives on the ballot, there's a disparity there.
Makes no
And
sense.
So, we're looking into
Okay,
it.
thank you for that.
And I want to, just an opinion render an opinion as someone who does a lot of allocations in his profession. I don't believe their allocation meets OMB standards of being reasonable and consistent. It's probably consistent, but it's not reasonable that a district with 4 seats pays as much as the county with umpteen issues. And just on the face of it, I don't even think it's GAAP. So I'm really glad that CSDA is looking into it.
Okay, so, anyway, we're on it.
Okay.
On the Cox-Wooden, a clarification there.
That was the audit letter.
Right, they write a letter to the auditor saying that as far as they know, what litigation, all the legal counsel does that, what litigation, and that was a charge for writing that letter to our auditor. What litigation is pending? I think in that case, the answer is none.
I just have a couple quick comments. So I hope that when we have a little bit more information about what kind of craziness is happening with the elections office, that could come back as an agenda item so that we can talk about it a little bit more. Because I have been researching this, and I have a lot of spreadsheets on it that I've collected over the years about how they break out the costs. And I definitely think it's something that we need to look at because the costs are going up, and it's quite unreasonable for a special district with our budget and for people who serve the public and virtually, I mean, we're not getting salaries like you would if you ran for the Board of Supervisors. So something is really broken.
So we can certainly bring it back. The item is bills and claims, but this is on our radar.
So it's gonna come
Absolutely.
back. Okay, good.
On our
And
radar.
then the other thing I wanted to mention is just that this month, we have about $45,000 in legal fees, and I think a lot of that is related to the cartel bankruptcy, and there's not a whole lot we can do to avoid that, but I just wanted to point it out. Thank you.
So is there a motion to accept bills and claims?
I move to
So
accept.
moved.
Second.
Do we need a roll call, or can we do consent?
No, it's off
Roll
of
call.
consent.
Roll call.
Commissioner Bernard,
Aye.
Commissioner Chancarelli,
Aye.
Commissioner Matthews,
Aye.
Commissioner Lorenz,
Aye.
Commissioner Brennan.
Aye.
Okay, item 3, regular meeting minutes of March 15th was requested to be pulled.
So I could talk about 3 and, where's the other one? Is it 5? 3
Can we just say, we have any minutes?
3 and 5, I have the same comment.
Okay, and something public? Okay.
What's that?
So we distributed revised minutes. The board package did not include pages, page 2 or 4 of the minutes in the board package. You've received revised ones, and additionally, the minutes referenced an attachment from President Matthews. The attachments included were in fact handouts that were distributed during the course of the meeting. So that clarification has been made as well.
Thank you, and that was one of the reasons I pulled the minutes, because we were missing a few pages. I didn't know if it was in every packet.
Yes.
So I just want to mention again that we do have a section in our minutes that is specifically for items that are not heard. And I think that we would benefit from adding a section to our agenda that's similar, so that as these items aren't heard, they roll on to the next agenda, and then a new section that's specific to items not heard at the last meeting. It's a suggestion, and that's all I have on the minutes.
Is there a motion to approve items 3 and 5?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Commissioner Bernardo?
Aye.
Commissioner Kenny?
Aye.
Commissioner Chancarelli?
Aye.
Commissioner Lorenz?
Aye.
Commissioner Mateo?
Aye. Item 7, activity reports for April. It's an information only, but is requested to be pulled.
So I requested this, and my point in requesting this is, and we've gone over this already, that when we don't finish something in our meetings, it just evaporates. It's like to me, it's like you tell your kids, do your homework, and they don't finish it, and then somehow or another they think it's done, but you force them to do it. And I think we have a responsibility to, if we don't get through something in our meeting, we need to move it to the next meeting. And your suggestion, Commissioner Brennan, seems reasonable, but however we do it, I don't want it to just disappear.
So I have a couple comments about this item. And I noticed we're not getting staff reports, which I guess is okay, but I think this information in these reports is really valuable, and it helps us understand what our employees are doing at each facility. And so I liked it when these were items where our staff actually spoke to us and gave staff reports. I'm really uncomfortable with not getting staff reports on these things, because I think it leaves the board out of touch with what is happening at both of our facilities, and it's our only real sort of communication mechanism between the board and the staff. But I'll put that aside. The other reason that I want to comment is there's some attachments here related to a CEP, letters from the Coastal Commission, letters from our staff to a leasee, and I got a call from the Half Moon Bay Seafood Marketing Association today to tell me that what was in the packet is not what's on the website, and they were concerned that these things were not on the website, so I'm assuming we could easily just post them. So that was probably just an oversight or something, and maybe that got fixed later, but I got a call, I think it was around noon.
I talked to Lisa as well.
Oh, you did? Okay, so you've heard about it. And then, the one thing that I had a question about was there were some letters, and I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time finding them because there was a lot of attachments here. But, oh, here we go. So on page 741, there's a letter from, the Harbor District to 3 captains, and it talks about relocating the floating dock, blah, 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 and then there's a picture of relocating the floating dock. And I did get this call, same call, with concern that this isn't something that has been discussed with our fishing community. And relocating things like docks is, especially when it's a work dock that they use all the time for their jobs, they want to be part of the discussion, and this needs to be, brought to the board so they can comment, or workshopped, or somehow it needs to get vetted by the people who use it. So I don't even understand what's going on here with this letter. And then there's this other letter, which is page 7-43, which says the district will include replacement of the fender piles as part of the CDP application for piling repair at the end of Johnson Pier. And then the previous letter I just talked about, has this relocation, which requires driving 3 concrete piles adjacent to Johnson Pier and attaching to the dock using steel standoffs, so on and so forth. all of this costs money, and my understanding was that while I get that the board directed staff to work with the applicant to potentially put a hoist if you can get coastal commission approval to do it on the side where whatever you're working on, it was very clearly stated by, I believe it was our general manager at that meeting, that the cost would be borne by the leasee. And it's not clear that that's the case in these letters, so I think there needs to be some explaining to the public and the board about what's happening with that and who's paying for it, because I don't think that we should be doing facility improvements without, for an individual leasee to facility that they're not leasing and paying for it for them on their behalf. That, to me, seems very odd and like a gift of public funds, and maybe I'm misunderstanding what's happening, but I hope that we get a clear update, and I think this should be agendized so that we understand it.
Certainly, I also spoke, as I said, with Lisa Damrosch. The dock that is getting, needs to move is not in fact a work dock, it's what we call the impound dock. It's a dock that we use for centralizing for purposes of security, basically, impounded vessels. Happy to bring the entire item back to the board for discussion, but Commissioner Brennan, you are absolutely correct. This is staff working with the applicant to effect the direction of the board at its October meeting of last year.
And who is paying for all of this?
I think if I were to look at that October staff report, I think it would say that the applicant would have to pay for the relocation of the dock. But as I look at this, the fender piles would probably be on us because that is a deteriorated condition of the pier that we need to fix, and we've got to provide them a place to put the dock. And I know that John Moran, our Director of Ops, and John Draper, our Assistant Harbor Master, scoured the harbor looking for another place to put it. Be happy to bring this item back for further discussion, but we are just implementing previous board direction.
Yeah, I think we need to hear about it, because where you're putting it doesn't look like it's going to be particularly useful, so.
It's going to be of limited use, and we may consider simply not relocating it.
Right.
Yeah, I just think what I want to caution our staff about is previously in the history of the hoist saga, there were a lot of backroom decisions made behind the scenes that weren't vetted publicly, and we definitely don't want to go there again.
No.
So I think it's good
Agreed.
to air this stuff and
Yep.
get it in front
As you
of,
see.
so that we can have a discussion.
As you see.
Are we good with item 7?
Yes.
So, motion to accept.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Brennan? Aye. Commissioner Lorenz?
Aye.
Commissioner Mateo?
Aye.
Commissioner Chancarelli?
Aye.
Commissioner Brennan?
Aye.
If everyone's to be very, very, very congratulated. I believe this is going to be the first agenda that we get through, unless this is going to take more than 12 minutes. We do have a request to pull item 9, third quarter rent report.
I think, did I pull that? I think I
You
pulled
did.
that. Yes, so, let me find it, Barry here. By the way that this staff report is numbered, it is very not user-friendly, so I'm hoping that we can come up with a different numbering system so that we're not repeating numbers over and over again through the board packet, because it's just like, I'm having a really hard time finding anything, but anyway. Okay, item 9. So, the thing that I think would be helpful here is if we divided the rent report into 2 sections so that we could get totals for OPM and totals for PCH. Because right now, all we have, unless I'm misunderstanding this, is a grand total at the bottom and it's not showing the total of rent coming in for each different location, which is an important data point. So if we could please correct that. And then the other thing is, we've lost some lease space recently. I think 200,000 a year. Do I have that right?
The Oyster Point.
At Oyster Point, didn't we lose 200,000 a year in lease
Not
revenue?
yet, but we will be.
Oh, we're gonna be losing that lease revenue? So if there are places where lease revenue is going away, I would hope that somehow on this report, that could be documented so that when we're looking at it, we're recognizing that something is going to be changing or has changed, so that we can track, what's happening with our lease revenue. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense. If it's a third quarter rent report, of course, there could be a note added, but it's a third quarter rent report, so it would only show what has already happened.
Right.
We could have a note that says expected to go away in August.
That would be helpful, just as a reminder, because sometimes I forget about it, and, I'm trying to get a read on this. It does show current year to date, and it also shows previous year to date, but could we also include a column, and maybe it's here and I don't see it, that shows the total we got for last year, so we could see what we got in lease revenue last year? Because if we're just looking at it quarterly, we're just looking at these little.
There is a previous year and quarter year total column, if that's what you're referring to,
I see previous year to date.
and current year to date, right next to each other at the end, and a percent and a change.
But could there be like a total amount for the previous year? You know what I mean? So we could see the total amount we took in lease revenue last year?
584, 470 at the bottom.
So that's for the full year last year, not
Yes.
just.
No, that's,
Previous
That's
year to
to
date.
date.
Oh, I see, you're looking for the full year
Yeah.
Yes.
from last year. So
Yeah.
it's another column. Possibly you realize it will become smaller on our 8.5 by 11 page to add a column.
Well, maybe we go horizontal.
If Debbie has no
Well-
problem doing that, that's fine.
if that's, yeah. Yeah, we can add any information this commission wishes. It's,
It just seems like important data point.
Yeah.
It makes the whole thing make more sense,
Right.
especially totaling out the two different locations. And I don't have a problem with the grand total of the combined, but I think that the whole idea is just to make the report useful. And those are just a couple of minor tweaks.
And I think these, if I could, and I say this as the outgoing, I think these are really, it's good, useful to find out how to make these reports useful. But the more data in there, the more data I think is interesting to see. The bigger the report gets, the more confusing and harder it reads gets. What we need to focus on is here the focus on from the commission is the data that you find most valuable. Let's make sure that's in there and that the other stuff
Is that what
isn't.
you're asking for?
That's what I'm asking for. Yeah, the data that I would find most useful.
And it's all additional to what's in here now. So I'm just saying the report will get, I think, bigger, more difficult to read. But you will, I'm sure Anita will try to
Well, does
provide
it
that
make
data.
sense to have another page? This is the third quarter.
Yes.
I mean, it's not.
There could be
a
another
full
page.
year.
Added on of, this is third quarter, so 75% of budget versus actual, so then you can see, well, if we're not at 75%, are we at 73 or 77?
It could be a two-page report, definitely.
Well, and where were we last year, year over year, in the same quarter?
That's
I
in
mean,
there.
yeah, but, well, I know
So
what you're
is that
saying.
clear? Okay,
Yes.
thanks so much, I appreciate it.
Motion to approve item 9.
I move that we approve item 9.
Second.
Roll call.
Commissioner Bernardo?
Aye.
Commissioner Chantarelle?
Aye.
President Mateusz?
Aye.
Commissioner Lorenz?
Aye.
Commissioner Brennan?
Aye.
This is going to be glorious to say. Is there a motion to adjourn? So moved.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Congratulations, commissioners.